Welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you've been consuming media lately, you've probably felt that creeping suspicion. Despite the staggering volume of content, despite the limitless budgets and the constant self-congratulation about the golden age of streaming, why does so much of the new output feel, well, fundamentally hollow?
Yeah.
Why is it so easy to watch an entire series while simultaneously scrolling through your phone, feeling fully caught up, yet completely uninvested?
It's a really good question, and it's an indictment, I think, of the current media landscape.
Yeah.
It's also a fascinating paradox to study, right?
Absolutely.
We have these top-tier directors migrating to streaming platforms. We've got, arguably greater diversity in storytelling than ever before, and yet the average viewer is struggling to find content that truly commands or even demands their active, undivided attention.
Yeah, that full focus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to move beyond just, critiquing bad writing, which is easy to do. We are diving into the source material that suggests this decline isn't really an artistic accident. It's more like a systemic failure rooted in a profound shift in the industry's whole business model.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately because the core argument we found in our sources is startling and highly specific. The idea that the quality of streaming content has suffered not due to a lack of talent, not due to a lack of resource, but because of a mandated directive handed down from the highest levels of executive decision-making.
Exactly. And this is where we introduce the concept that, it fundamentally underpins the modern content factory, second screen viewing.
Okay.
And this isn't just a behavior that studios have noticed people doing. It's a reality they have formally incorporated into their production count, into how they make things.
Right. We all know the behavior. You're watching the latest, big blockbuster show, but maybe you're simultaneously checking TikTok, maybe ordering groceries on your phone, or just doom scrolling through the newsfeed. We're constantly multitasking.
Yeah, we are.
The content ends up being, the auditory and visual wallpaper of our distraction, almost.
That's a great way to put it. Wallpaper. And executives, seeing data that confirms this widespread distraction, they've internalized this belief that the audience just won't focus. They simply won't. Therefore, instead of making content good enough, engaging enough to pull the phone out of the viewer's hand,
which you'd think would be the goal.
You would think. But no, they've instructed writers and showrunners to adapt the content to the distraction. And the resulting mandate is pretty clear. Plot lines, character motivations, even the dialogue itself must be simplified, sometimes aggressively simplified.
Wow.
All to ensure that the story can be followed, even if you, the viewer, are looking at your phone, say, 80% of the time.
That feels like the silent, purposeful sabotage of storytelling as an art form.
It kind of does, doesn't it?
If the entire process is designed around accommodating the viewer's distraction, then complexity, nuance, subtext, the requirement for active engagement, all the things that make great stories memorable and resonant, they're inherently stripped out by design.
Precisely. If we follow the money and we follow the internal executive logic that our sources point to, the consequence is crystal clear. Complexity is deemed a liability. It's a problem, not a feature.
So our mission statement for this deep dive, then, is to trace how these foundational changes in how content is funded, this big shift from an ad-supported meritocracy, let's call it, to a subscription-based annuity model, how that has intentionally led to the dumbing down of media.
Yeah. Creating content that's just less nuanced, less layered, and arguably contributing to a broader cultural ecosystem of superficial engagement. But to really understand what we've lost or what's being lost, we need to establish a truly relevant benchmark. We need to know what we're comparing it to.
Right.
So to truly gauge this perceived decline, we can't just compare modern streaming shows to the universally acknowledged, Mount Rushmore dramas like The Sopranos or The Wire. That's setting the bar maybe unfairly high for everything.
That's fair. That's prestige TV.
Exactly. We need a standard that represents the quality that was actually achievable in what we might just call run-of-the-mill broadcast television, just regular TV.
Okay, so you're talking about the standard of yesteryear, shows that weren't necessarily these high-concept, limited-run prestige projects, but standard network or syndicated TV. Shows running for, 22 episodes a season, year after year?
Yeah, exactly.
But still demonstrating genuine intellectual and maybe emotional quality.
Absolutely. And the source material points to what I think is an ideal case study.
That's right.
The Next Generation, TNG.
Ah, okay. Classic.
Classic. And this was syndicated television, remember? It was designed basically to fill a time slot across various local markets. It wasn't HBO. Yet it consistently used the genre of science fiction, not merely for, phaser fights and cool aliens.
Well, it had those too.
They had those too, sure. But it used the genre as a vehicle for some pretty complex philosophical inquiry. real discussion.
And what's crucial here, I think, is the structure that allowed for that depth, right? You mentioned 22, sometimes 26 episodes a season in that old model. That provided a kind of narrative breathing room that modern streaming, with its 6 or 8 or 10 episodes, simply doesn't allow.
That's a critical distinction. Absolutely. Modern streaming shows, typically running, 6 to 10 episodes, they operate under this intense pressure for relentless plot acceleration. Every single episode must move the A-plot forward aggressively. There's no time to waste.
Right. Got to keep people hooked for next week or, prevent the binge watcher from clicking away.
Exactly. Whereas TNG, with its, let's say, 26-episode mandate back then, could afford these conceptual detours. The writers could actually dedicate an entire hour, maybe minus commercial break, to a philosophical debate or a character study that might have had no bearing on the season-long arc, if there even was.
Interesting.
Which allowed them to explore an idea thoroughly, really dig into it, not just use it functionally to get to the next plot.
Okay, so what specific examples from TNG highlight this surprising intellectual curiosity you're talking? Especially for, regular syndicated.
Well, let's start with the existential stuff. Take the episode Time Zero. Okay, the plot framework is about temporal mechanics. Weird time stuff happens. Standard sci-fi fare. But the core of the episode deals with Data, the android, facing this potential scenario where he could be lost to the past or effectively face his own kind of death. The show doesn't just treat this as a will they save him sci-fi threat. It uses it to explore the concept of mortality itself.
Wow, okay.
Data actually realizes or verbalizes that he feels a sense of relief that he's not truly immortal because the possibility of an end, the finitude of exist, provides context and meaning to his existence, even as an android.
That's deep for a show trying to sell ad time between segments.
It's profound existentialism happening during commercial breaks on syndicated television. It's kind of amazing when you think back.
And the dialogue used to convey that probably wasn't just blunt exposition either, right? It was likely woven into the character interactions, the visual storytelling.
Exactly. It required the viewer to be actually present, paying attention, to catch the nuances of Data's internal journey or, his processing of these concepts. You had to watch.
You couldn't just listen while doing the dishes?
Probably not, and get the full impact, no. Or consider the sociological depth. The source material we looked at notes the episode where Data loses his memory. He's stranded on this primitive, non-technological.
Okay, another classic sci-fi trope.
A trope, yes, but it's how they used it. This isn't just a plot device to create peril. It's framed as a social experiment. The episode explores, with really surprising care, how a society reacts to an unknown, powerful creature Data that looks human but clearly isn't. And you see the full spectrum of reactions. There's immediate fear, there's tribalism, us versus them, but there's also genuine curiosity. There's compassion, and you see how this small community learns, struggles, and eventually kind of incorporates this other into their existence.
So it's an exploration of acceptance, xenophobia?
Absolutely. Using the sci-fi setting as a safe mirror for very real human behavior. Without hitting you over the head with it.
Contrast that with the modern structure, where if a character loses their memory, the very next scene is probably spent with another character verbally explaining the memory loss, explaining the stakes, and immediately setting up the next plot beat to fix it.
Yeah, there's rarely time to just sit in the sociological tension or the character implications anymore. It's got to move.
Right.
And we can't forget the Borg. I mean, come on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, the Borg. Resistance is futile.
Exactly. They weren't just a cool, scary antagonist for a space battle, although they were that too. They were the ultimate philosophical foil. They represented the complete erasure of the individual in favor of the collective, pure collectivism.
A terrifying concept.
Terrifying. And TNG dedicated extensive narrative real estate, multiple episodes, story arcs to exploring the implications of radical collectivism versus radical individual. They explored the horror of losing your identity, sure, but also, subtly, maybe the perverse comfort found in conformity, and ultimately, the absolute necessity of individual thought and dissent.
So this was high-level political and philosophical discourse baked right into mainstream entertainment.
Pretty much, yeah. And the difference, as the source material suggests, seems to be that these older shows were often written by people who appeared to have genuine, maybe broader lived experience and intellectual curiosity. They were utilizing the platform to actually explore ideas, maybe start discussions, not just fulfill the checklist of required plot beats handed down from somewhere.
That intellectual curiosity, kind of the baseline expectation.
It feels like it was, at least more often than not. Now let's contrast this baseline, this standard syndicated show quality, with contemporary attempts at smart TV, the ones that often mimic the style without having the substance.
Okay, and the case study provided in the source here is a show called Alien Earth, which seems to represent this modern imitation, a show that desperately wants you to think it's thoughtful.
Right. And according to the analysis, it fails because it confuses slow pacing and, frankly, pretentious-sounding dialogue with actual intellectual depth.
The slow means smart fallacy.
Exactly. The source describes the viewing experience as, well, bad and boring. It felt like it was high on itself, took an unconscionable amount of time to get anywhere plot-wise, and ultimately wasn't really smart at all. It just postured as smart.
So the writers seem to be signaling their intelligence rather than actually demonstrating it through, say, complex narrative or character work or...
Precisely. It highlights the clear distinction, doesn't it, between writers who genuinely have something intelligent or thoughtful to say and use the medium to explore it, like in TNG, and writers who merely want to sound smart, using esoteric concepts as window dressing. The result is often hollow content that leaves the viewer feeling disconnected, or worse, bored.
Yeah, you just don't care.
You just don't care. And this brings us right to what the source calls the prestige paradox, because the common counter-argument you hear is, but wait, we do have incredible quality. Look, Guillermo del Toro is making movies for Netflix. Martin Scorsese made The Irishman for Netflix.
And they are. Those are facts. But this fact, the source argues, doesn't actually negate the overall damage the model has done. It might actually expose a separate failure, a failure of the traditional theatrical distribution.
Exactly right. These high-caliber directors, these auteurs, are often moving to streaming. Not necessarily because Netflix or other streamers offer a superior artistic experience, though sometimes the creative freedom pitch is there, but because major studio executives who are now laser-focused almost solely on established IP and massive franchise.
Superheroes, sequels, reboots.
Yeah, all that. They simply don't know how, or perhaps don't want, to market or sell non-franchise, original, adult-oriented films theatrically. It's seen as too risky.
So it's a failure of nerve on the part of the tradition. They're pushing great storytellers towards streaming platforms that operate on this very different volume-based, greenlight all the content kind of structure.
That's the argument. Streaming becomes the refuge, almost by default, for a certain kind of cinematic artistry. But crucially, that refuge is funded by the very flawed, volume-driven subscription model that we're suggesting is hurting overall quality.
So the occasional great film is like an exception, maybe even subsidized by the vast continuous spew of filler content designed for retention.
That's the interpretation presented. The fundamental incentive structure for most content has been corrupt. And to really understand how that happened, we need to follow the money. We need to look at the structural.
Okay, the shift in the financial ecosystem seems to be the real engine behind the decline Let's start with the old model. The ratings and advertisement meritocracy called it.
Right. Under the old system broadcast and basic cable for decades, TV shows were fundamentally tied to the attention economy. Their entire revenue, their existence, was dependent on ratings.
How many people?
Exactly. And those ratings directly correlated to the price advertisers were willing to pay for commercial spots during that show. CPM, the cost per mil, or cost per 1,000 viewers.
And the entire structure of broadcast television was a product of this need for ad space, wasn't it? That's why we had the 22-minute show fitting neatly into a 30-minute slot, or the 45-minute drama in an hour.
Precisely. That gap, the 5 to 15 minutes filled with embedded advertisements, that was the absolute golden goose. That's where the money came from.
So the goal back then was simple, maybe but very maximize the eyes on the TV show to maximize the ad revenue you could charge for those slots.
Absolutely. And this created an undeniable, powerful incentive for quality, or at least for broad appeal, that kept people watching. If your show was appointment viewing something people had to stop their life for every Tuesday at 8 p.m., gather the family around.
Water cooler talk the next day.
Exactly. Then you could charge premium ad rate. Quality, or at least intense viewer engagement, directly translated to increased profitability and, importantly, reduced risk for the network. If your show was bad, if people weren't watching,
it got canceled quickly.
Swiftly canceled. Because it wasn't attracting the necessary attention to justify the valuable airtime it was occupying. It was, in many ways, a harsh meritocracy based on...
Okay. But that model is largely gone, or at least significantly diminished in influence, especially with the rise of streaming. Streaming fundamentally changed the revenue.
Completely. It shifted from that transient ad-based revenue tied to individual viewership of specific shows to the flat monthly subscription fee paid by the viewer.
Yeah.
Regardless of what they watch, or even if they watch anything that month.
Once you're subscribed, they've got your money for that month.
They've got your money. And this transition moved the entire industry, financially speaking, from a high-stakes, show-by-show risk profile, where every premiere was a gamble, to a much more stable, predictable annuity model.
Annuity model, meaning?
Meaning studios gained a constant, guaranteed stream of revenue based purely on the size of their subscriber. As long as that base remained relatively stable, or ideally growing, they eliminated the immediate, brutal, show-by-show pressure of ratings and specific audience approval for each piece of content.
So the goal shifts completely then. The new goal isn't really to sell premium ads for a specific hit show anymore. The core financial imperative becomes solely keep people subscribed, keep them paying that monthly fee for another.
That's the new prime directive, retention, churn prevention.
And this leads directly, according to the sources, to the content spew strategy.
It does. Because if the money flows in monthly, pretty much regardless of how good or bad the last show was, the key to retention, the executives seem to believe, isn't necessarily quality. It's volume and velocity. Constant newness.
Just keep pumping it out.
Keep pumping it out. They feel they must produce a constant, almost overwhelming quantity of new content to ensure that subscribers always have something fresh popping up on the new and trending list or whatever the algorithm surfaces.
And we saw the strategy implemented really aggressively by Disney Plus, especially right after launch, with their massive push for Marvel and Star Wars television content.
Oh, yeah, that's the quintessential case study. Look at that constant drip feed they started. Loki, then WandaVision, then Falcon and Winter Soldier, She-Hulk, Ms. Marvel, Moon Knight.
Yeah.
It just kept coming.
One after another.
One after another. The objective seemed very clearly to be about continuous momentum. As soon as one show from a major IP stable concluded, another one would begin, sometimes overlapping. The goal wasn't necessarily creating one transcendent piece of art that everyone loved and talked about for years.
Although maybe they hoped for this.
Maybe hoped. But the strategic goal, the financial goal, was seemingly to guarantee that the viewer felt compelled to maintain that monthly subscription fee just to keep up with the overall narrative flow of the universe, or simply to ensure they always had a default viewing option within that ecosystem they were already invested in.
Yeah.
Keep them inside the walled garden.
It's content as utility then, like paying for electricity, it's just there. But if the content's main job is just continuous maintenance, just filling the pipeline, doesn't that remove the financial reason for it to be particularly well written or innovative?
It certainly weakens that reason significantly. Furthermore, the source material points out how certain accounting practices might favor this volume approach too. Studios often amortize the cost of production, meaning they spread the massive budget of a show over multiple years on their book. And it's much easier to justify doing that financially if the service can point to a massive library that's constantly being refreshed with new titles. High volume can facilitate aggressive amortization schedules, making the streaming service look more financially stable on paper, even if the individual products being added are maybe rushed or of lower quality.
So the pressure shifts from the artistic director or the showrunner to make something great to the factory floor needing to meet production quotas.
That's a good analogy. The content is essentially manufactured to fill a schedule, to meet a volume target. Yeah. And this fundamentally devalues the product itself, moving it from a unique story or artistic vision to just another inventory piece, a widget necessary for churn prevention.
So under the old ad model, a bad ep or a string of bad was an immediate financial threat. Ratings drop, ads get cheaper, show gets canceled.
Right. Direct concept.
But under the new subscription model, a poorly received show can run its entire course, get bad reviews, generate zero buzz, and still be considered a kind of success internally if it merely provided, say, 8-10 weeks of ambient retention for a segment subscriber and contributed to the illusion of that massive, constantly growing catalog.
That definitely seems possible within this model. It shifts the entire risk profile for creating content. Low-performing shows can become sustainable filler because the overall revenue stream is guaranteed by the subscribers who are there for other reasons.
Which brings us back to the second screen idea and how writers are actually being told to handle this low-risk volume product. What are they being asked to do?
Right. So when you combine that economic imperative for sheer volume discussed with the executive's assumption of constant audience distraction that we started with.
Yeah, the belief that nobody's really watching closely.
Exact. You arrive at the specific mandate that seems to be affecting the writing itself. The content gets reduced, essentially, to a commodity. Its primary function, in this view, becomes serving as auditory wallpaper, something you have on in the back.
So the core mindset, then, from the top down, is that viewers are not really sitting down to watch these shows intently. They're consuming them maybe for background ambiance while they're distracted by their phones or doing chores or cooking dinner.
It sounds cynical, but yeah, the visual medium, television, is effectively being treated like radio, something you mostly listen to.
Wow.
And this belief system, according to the sources, result in this official order from on high, which is the simplification man. Writers are being explicitly told, not implicitly, explicitly, to dumb down their script so they can function effectively as second screen content.
Meaning content that's accessible even when the viewer's eyes are mostly elsewhere.
Precisely. And this is where the lifeblood of sophisticated storytelling subtext is intentionally drained away. It has to.
Okay, let's analyze the mechanics of this on-the-nose dialogue, because this feels like a defining characteristic of a lot of modern writing that people complain about. And now it seems like it might be intentional design, not just bad.
I think that's the core argument here. Sophisticated storytelling often relies heavily on implied emotion, on subtext, on showing rather than telling. A character might look sad, they might sigh heavily, turn their back, walk slowly away from a conversation.
And the audience infers their disappointment.
Right. Through those visual cues, through the actor's performance, maybe the music, the lighting, the whole cinematic language, you infer their emotional state, their reaction to the conversation. But that requires active visual engagement from the audience. You have to be looking at.
But the streaming mandate, the second screen thinking, seems to eliminate that subtle engagement requirement.
It forces overt explanation instead. The dialogue must become extremely obvious, on the nose. So the character no longer just sighs and walks away. They now have to stop, turn back, and overtly state something like, I am feeling sad right now because I am very disappointed in how our conversation went, and I am worried about the potential consequences of action X that we just discussed.
Slight laugh.
Yeah.
It sounds ridiculous when you say it like that.
I see it. I really do see it in shows now.
It's everywhere once you start looking for it. They explain the plot out loud. They explain their own actions. They verbalize their motivations clearly. They state their emotions directly. And often they do it multiple times across different scenes just in case the viewer missed the previous explanation while they were, browsing Twitter or checking.
It's like the show is actively summarizing itself every 3 minutes. It treats the audience not just as distracted, but almost as if they have severe short-term memory loss. Well, yeah. It's a mechanism, really, for ensuring functional continuity of the story when visual continuity from the viewer is assumed to be broken by their inattention. They are preemptively accommodating the distraction they assume is happening.
So this mandate confirms, potentially, that the lack of subtlety, the lack of nuance we often feel, it's not necessarily an accident or just a symptom of weak talent in the writer's room.
Although that can exist too, of course.
Of course, but it could be an engineered design feature specifically meant to serve the higher goal of subscriber retention through ambient viewing.
That's the disturbing takeaway from the analysis, yes. And crucially, as you mentioned earlier, this isn't just some theoretical academic analysis. This practice is documented. It's verified within the industry itself, according to the sources.
Right, the evidence.
Yeah, the source material specifically references Justine Bateman, former Hollywood actress, now an independent director and writer, quite vocal about industry issues. She spoke openly, based on the source, about friends of hers, working writers in the industry right now, receiving direct, specific orders from studio heads and executives.
Orders to do what?
To simplify and dumb down their scripts explicitly, to make them fit this second screen, easy listening mold.
Wow. That's confirmation from the trench.
It seems to be. It confirms that this lack of nuance isn't always accidental. It can be an intentional creative limitation imposed from above for what are seen as financial or strategic utilities.
The philosophical implication here is truly disturbing, though. If this is true, the ultimate goal shifts away from creating a memorable narrative experience that commands your attention.
Right, something that stays with you.
And shifts towards just generating continuous audio-visual presence, a sort of sound wall, as you said, that serves purely as a retention tool, regardless of whether the viewer is actually invested or engaged.
It is the ultimate passive retention strategy, isn't it?
Yeah.
The content keeps the app open on the smart TV, keeps the subscription fee flowing, and it keeps the viewer maybe marginally engaged through just the auditory cues, preventing them from consciously making the decision to leave the service or switch to something else. Just on.
But this model, which sounds like it's designed for stability and predictability, seems to be creating massive internal crises and problems for the streamers themselves. It's not all smooth.
No, not at all. The first major self-inflicted wound caused by this content spew strategy is the problem of content overload and, consequently, content burial.
Ah, yes, the paradox of choice, taken to a ridiculous extreme. That feeling when you open Netflix or whatever service, and the sheer vast volume of product, all required, supposedly, to maintain that illusion of endless freshness, it ends up paralyzing the audience. You don't know what to pick.
Research into actual viewer behavior absolutely supports this. Viewers, when faced with literally thousands of titles, often spend hours just scrolling. The infamous Netflix scroll.
We've all been there.
We've all been there. Paralyzed by choice, unable to commit to watching anything new because the effort of choosing feels too high, or the risk of picking something bad feels too great. And what happens? Often they just give up.
Right, you default to rewatching an old episode of The Office or Friends or something comfortable.
Exactly. Or they simply turn off the service altogether, even while remaining subscribed for another month. So that vast quantity, which was prioritized over quality for retention, ironically means that much of the content produced simply gets buried by the algorithm anyway. It never achieves the visibility necessary to even theoretically justify its production expense.
And the user interface design of these platforms often exacerbates, right? The UI is engineered to constantly push newness and novelty above all else, again, for churn, which means genuinely good quality content that might have landed on the service a few months ago often just sinks beneath the waves, algorithmically hidden.
That is the core conflict, isn't it? Maximizing retention through sheer volume inherently sacrifices the ability of any individual show to genuinely stand out, find its audience, and build long-term value through merit and word of mouth. It's quantity over discoverability.
Which connects directly to the second major problem identified, the complete disconnect in this model between revenue and quality for any given show.
Yes, because that monthly subscription revenue is basically guaranteed as long as churn is managed. The intense old model incentive, the need to make individual shows genuinely good, genuinely compelling, is fundamentally removed, or at least severely weakened.
The stakes are lower for each individual bet.
Much lower. Studios gain an enormous margin for error. If the revenue is guaranteed anyway, they feel emboldened perhaps to shove whatever they want, as the source puts it, onto the service. The show no longer has to be good to survive financially. It just has to exist to populate the catalog and keep the pipeline full.
And this strategy seems heavily reliant on what the source calls the back catalog effect, that powerful nostalgia factor that might be holding the entire financial structure together for some service.
This is a huge, often unstated financial truth underpinning the streaming. Many people subscribe and stay subscribed primarily for the vast existing library, the old classics, the established movie franchises, the comfort viewing from their past.
Yeah,
The source specifically notes that surveys often show this is a primary reason people subscribe to, say, Disney Plus. It's not always for the brand new Marvel or Star Wars show. It's often for the deep catalog of classic Pixar, classic Disney animation, the Fox library, the legacy films they grew up with.
That makes sense. The comfort food.
Exactly. And if the core subscription money is guaranteed by that powerful nostalgic back catalog, then the studios are financially insulated. It allows them to greenlight new, maybe poorly written or rushed filler content without having to care too deeply about widespread audience approval or critical acclaim for that specific new output.
So, using an example from the source, modern Star Trek shows on Paramount Plus here, or maybe certain Marvel shows on Disney Plus here, they can continue running and receiving funding season after season, even with mixed reception.
Right.
Because the money is already flowing into the platform from subscriptions paid for a whole bunch of other reasons, completely unrelated to that specific new show. The new content is essentially running on borrowed capital and, maybe more importantly, borrowed nostalgia.
The entire relationship between creator and audience has fundamentally changed. It stopped being primarily about earning the viewer's attention and engagement with this specific story and started being more about utilizing the subscriber's existing loyalty to the platform or the brand or the back catalog.
Okay, but this entire strategy, the content spew, the second screen mandate, the deliberate dumbing down it all seems to rest on a fundamental, maybe even arrogant misconception about the audience itself. This feels like the crucial point that the studios might be missing, the one we really need to challenge.
I agree. The core misconception is the executive assumption that audiences want to be distracted. That ambient noise, that second screen viewing is somehow their preferred mode of consumption for narrative entertainment.
But the counter-argument presented in the source is simple and powerful as the only reason a viewer pulls out their phone or starts checking emails or starts doing other things while a show is on is because the TV show itself is not engaging or interesting enough to command their full attention in the first.
Exactly. Think about truly powerful story, a film that absolutely pins you to your seat, a novel you literally cannot put down. In those moments, do you want to be distracted?
No way. You get annoyed if someone interrupts you.
You actively resist distraction.
Yeah.
You want to focus because you're invested. You fear missing a subtle visual cue, a critical line of dialogue, a shift in the performance, that genuine invested attention that's the ultimate value proposition that sets deep narrative storytelling apart from truly disposable content, like maybe some random YouTube clips or TikTok videos.
So, by purposefully simplifying the content to accommodate the distraction they assume is inevitable, the studios are merely exacerbating the very problem they think they're essentially training the audience to expect and maybe even accept low-quality, low-investment content.
The inversion of cause and effect here is kind of staggering when you think about it. They treat viewer disengagement not as a symptom of potentially poor quality driven by their own flawed financial structure, but as some kind of universal, immutable law of modern viewing.
People just have short attention spans now.
Right. Instead of recognizing maybe our show isn't compelling enough. If studios actually want more people to engage deeply with their output, the argument goes, they must stop designing content around the distraction and start making genuinely great shows again. Shows that force the viewer through sheer quality and engagement to look up from their phone.
They've chosen to abdicate the responsibility of creating compelling art in favor of managing churn.
That seemed to be the crux of it, yeah.
Okay, let's try to summarize the overarching issue here, pulling it all together. It feels like Hollywood, or at least large parts of the traditional studio system, fundamentally lost faith in the intrinsic value of movies and television itself. They started viewing them less as art or potent storytelling, and more as interchangeable, disposable content units required simply to populate a streaming catalog.
I think that's a fair assessment based on the source. They chased the high-volume, flat monthly revenue model pioneered by Netflix, the Netflix money, leading essentially every major media player to rush frantically to create their own vertical streaming service, pulling their content back from other platforms.
And this mutual frantic pursuit of the same subscription model has resulted, arguably, in the industry tearing itself down, taking away the very value and prestige from the content formats, movies, and premium television that they used to champion and profit from immensely.
And this devaluation wasn't just contained to television series. It deeply affected the theatrical movie experience as well.
It seems like it.
Movies themselves seem to be suffering from the same second screen mentality creeping into their production. They feel increasingly dumbed down, simplified, visually over-explained some. And perhaps this is happening with the implicit or explicit expectation that their ultimate destiny, their most profitable long-term home, isn't the theater. It's just being another piece of ambiance filler in the endless online catalog once their brief theatrical window closed.
So why invest in complex, multi-layered, visually rich storytelling that demands a big screen and full attention if its ultimate, most financially important destination is guaranteed to be a background noise utility on a streaming?
It weakens the incentive significantly. It creates this sort of downward spiral where both movies and TV are chasing the same devalued streaming model.
But the strategy of relying on non-engaging ambiance, this wallpaper, it feels structurally flawed. It feels like it will ultimately fail. Audiences surely won't be satisfied forever by just constant generic noise.
You'd think not. Viewers eventually vote with their wallet, or maybe more accurately, they vote with their time and attention. They won't choose to passively listen to non-engaging ambience indefinitely, especially when they can find truly engaging, attention-grabbing content elsewhere, whether that's on other platforms or even going back to older, better-made media.
And crucially, we have to distinguish between this newly designed intentional ambiance and the comfort exception that the source material noted.
Yes, that distinction is absolutely key to understanding real viewer loyalty and behavior. People do sometimes play things in the background. We all do it.
Sure. Cooking, cleaning.
Right. But what do they play? Almost always, it's old movies or old TV shows that they're deeply nostalgic for. Often from that golden age of broadcast or earlier cable, shows they have a strong pre-existing emotional attachment.
They derive genuine comfort from the familiar music, the well-known dialogue, the predictable story. It's like a warm...
Exactly. And importantly, those were shows that were not originally made to be background. They were engaging, often high-quality products for their time that have accumulated emotional and nostalgic value over time. A brand new show created explicitly to be background noise from the outset, like the hollow output exemplified by Alien Earth in the analysis. It simply cannot establish any genuine emotional connection because it never prioritized quality, depth, or viewer engagement in the first place. It gives the audience zero reason to actually care about it or to return to it for comfort later. It's disposable by design and disposable in effect.
So by choosing to optimize for distraction instead of engagement, Hollywood is actively, if unintentionally, creating its own obsolescence, their seeding ground.
That's the sobering conclusion, yes. Other platforms you see it with independent creators, YouTubers doing deep dive video essays, niche streaming services focusing on specific genres or curated quality, they're rapidly filling the entertainment vacuum. They're providing content that does engage, often produced with far, far smaller budgets. Because those creators still understand the fundamental value of earning and retaining viewer attention through genuine quality, through offering something unique or insightful, not just through forced volume or ambient noise. Hollywood, in this view, no longer seems to grasp that television and movies are or should be more than just disposable piece streaming content.
Which brings us, finally, to the provocative thought, the big question that Hollywood seems determined to avoid asking itself now.
Yeah, the focus seems completely misplaced, absorbed in these superficial debates. We referenced the source mentioning a Variety article debating whether the Paramount CEO was ushering in a new era of alpha male masculinity, and you constantly see these distracting, often performative arguments over the political narratives embedded culture war stuff. And while that discussion is happening, bubbling on the surface, the crucial ignored question lurking beneath the entire industry's current existential crisis probably be much more fundamental. It should be, hey, maybe we should care about quality.
Just that. Can we make genuinely good movies and genuinely good TV shows again?
Yeah. Can the industry return to understanding and actually valuing storytelling as an intrinsic, complex, powerful art form in its own right, rather than just treating it as interchangeable content designed primarily for background noise and subscriber retention.
Because true, active earned engagement is the only thing that actually retains a long-term, loyal, invested audience, not just a past-subscribed one.
Exactly. If the industry truly wants to stop the bleeding, stop the audience erosion, stop the sense that everything feels a bit, they need to cease designing their product around the distraction they themselves helped create and enable, and start designing it around the inherent value of active, invested human attention. They need to trust the audience's intelligence and their desire for quality once more.
That's definitely something for you, the listener, to mull over the next time you find yourself scrolling through your phone while a brand new high-budget show plays barely noticed on. The real deep dive question is why you're distracted, but was the content designed to allow you? And ultimately, what value does that content possess if it doesn't even really want full attention?